Thank you, Rosie, and thank you all for being here. We have had so far 3 wonderful presentations. I think you probably have already gotten your money's worth. So there is no pressure on me then. But no, really, the presentations have been wonderful. They all had something in common, that is this depth. But also they had a quality that was particular to each of the talks. We had Rabbi Rami's joyful presentation, along with the depth that it had. Then Carl's was also deep and centering, peaceful. Pamela's was deep and also was committed to reality. So I want to follow the same, trying to keep the depth, but offer a different quality. So my talk will be deep and boring. And so, or deeply boring, but no, don't laugh because you are making me fail already. So, but no, we will look at something that is serious. All the talks approached something that is serious. But as we have been talking throughout the day, we live in a world that is experiencing a divisiveness and a polarization that I don't know that we have experienced at least in recent history. And what it's interesting to me, at least, is that this seems to be something that one of Blavatsky's teachers was seeing, that it had begun to happen in 1882. We have this quote, the idea that the intellectual portions of mankind seem to be fast dividing into 2 classes, between degrading superstition and still more degrading brutal materialism. The white dove of truth has hardly room where to rest her weary and welcome foot. So this was in 1882. And in the history of the Theosophical Society, we have this testimony by the founders that what they were asked by their teachers to do is to create an organization that can try to promote an approach to spirituality conducive to bridge that divide that evidently had started long ago. And this is what I want to share with you tonight, what kind of approach the Theosophical Society proposes to try to bring us together. I think it was evident in the 3 presentations today, this wonderful respect and nourishment from each other, from the different traditions. You know, we all have a particular tradition with which we may identify more, but the ability to recognize and to appreciate other people's paths is essential, and it's what can bring peace to the world. So the Theosophical Society was founded to address this, and this is one way of doing it. There are many ways. So I'm going to present what the founders thought could help. Now, before we go there, let's see this quote from Blavatsky, one of the founders of the Theosophical Society. She said, "True spiritual perfection and knowledge are nothing else but the complete identification of our finite selves with the great all." If you read theosophical literature, the first idea that comes up is this idea of unity, that we are all essentially one. Although we express ourselves, we manifest in a wide variety and diversity of forms, moods, qualities, etc. But essentially, we are one. And what Blavatsky is saying here, the quote continues, but she's saying that true spiritual perfection and knowledge can only happen when we are identified with the great all. And she says, it follows, therefore, that no spiritual progress at all is possible except by and through the bulk of humanity. It is only when the whole of humanity has attained happiness that the individual can hope to become permanently happy, for the individual is an inseparable part of the whole. So if this is true, this is very challenging, because we have seen how people are different, they may have different opinions, they may have different attitudes toward life, toward other people, and we may be tempted to disregard them and say they are lost, they don't matter. Let us all of us who think in the same way, let us come together and let us create our bubble, our world, and just disregard these people. But according to this view, it is just not possible for humanity to attain happiness while we are disregarding one part of humanity. You know, there are wars around the world, and we may think, well, I don't care about this country or this culture. And we may wish that this culture or country could be put down and just get rid of the problem, and that then we are going to be happy and to grow, etc. But again, as long as one part of humanity is suffering, is in conflict, most of us don't know what is going on in Africa, in the Middle East, with all the conflicts, and we think we can ignore all of that. But as long as there is one part of humanity that is still in trouble, then we cannot be happy. Within the country, we may think there are ignorant people, if we are on one side of the political divide, or we may think there are immoral people if we are on the other side. But if we are going to be happy as a country, we have to care for all of the people, for both sides. So how do we do this? This is the challenge. And of course, we can't just transform society. In the Theosophical view is an evolutionary view. And all this needs time. We tend to judge what happens in the world by the very narrow gauge of how long our bodies live, which is a blink in the eye of eternity, as Blavatsky says. But if we look at the trends from the last 200-300 years, in all areas, war, inequality, education, health, etc., all the trends are going in the right direction. Not as a smooth line, you know, they are declining, all these negative traits. Not as a smooth line we have, you know, we know how humanity goes through cycles, but they are all going in the right direction. There are websites where you can get all the statistics, non-governmental websites, and at this age, or in this age that there is so much anxiety, it's good to have a wider view so that we have a little more confidence. Now, this doesn't mean things are right, there is nothing to be fixed. Of course, we need to improve far more than the conditions that we have today. But we are moving in the right direction. So this should be an encouragement for all of us. And when we try to think of how to approach the problems, we need to think of everybody, how this is going to impact a person that lives in the middle of a city, or a person that lives in the middle of the country in a farm that is far away from hospitals or people or resources, internet. So we need to think of everybody if we are going to be able to be happy as a whole. So let's see some of the proposals of the Theosophical tradition. we are going to explore this integrative approach in three areas or fields. From the point of view of the perspective that the Theosophical tradition proposes, like in Buddhism, the Eightfold Noble Path begins with right view. Or in Hinduism, we have, for example, in the Viveka Chudamani of Shankaracharya, discernment, Viveka, the perception of truth is the first step. There are all these traditions that we may call them, to use a Western term, Gnostic traditions, Gnostic in the sense of wisdom or knowledge, true knowledge. There are these Gnostic traditions that propose the problem is that we don't have the right view. If we have the right view, which is not just intellectual view, but the right grasp, understanding, wisdom, then all the problems can be solved. So we will see what's the perspective that our tradition proposes. Then the integrative approach in connection to the different areas of development of a human being that are necessary to work toward this collective happiness. And then at the level of practices, how do we get there? So let us start with the first one. This is the Crotona Library. I lived in the Crotona Institute of Theosophy. I'll show a couple of pictures only from Crotona. So let's see the perspective. As you may be aware, there is a motto for the Theosophical Society. It's taken from a Sanskrit verse in the Vedas. It's a little rewritten, but it's a paraphrase. In Sanskrit, it's Satyat Nasti Parodharma, which we translate normally as there is no religion higher than truth. You can paraphrase this and say truth will always be beyond any religion. I would include here the Theosophical Society too, not because it is a religion, but we are not saying this in the sense of religions are not higher than truth, but the TS is right there. Because actually dharma has many meanings, but in this meaning, it means teaching, spiritual teaching, religious teaching. So we could say that there is no spiritual teaching higher than truth. Or the other way that I think is clearer, truth will always be beyond any spiritual teaching, be it Theosophical, Buddhist, Christian, Jewish. Truth per se cannot be captured by concepts. When we begin to think of this, we become aware that how we represent aspects of truth is different from truth itself, and therefore we can be far more flexible about the expression of truth. Because this is a problem we have, Juliana was asking in the panel about the problem between doctrine and practice. And most of the struggles between traditions is when they look at how are you explaining God or life, what happens after death, or what salvation is. When we go to the concepts, it's easy to clash. And for very little and subtle things, because we see within each tradition, there are all these splits and fights that only the people involved in that tradition understand how they are different. For somebody from outside say, what are you discussing? You are saying the same. So if we are rigid, or we assume that words have or can portray truth, then we will fight in how we are going to describe this. But if we are aware that truth will always be beyond, not because of any magical reason, but because even all the thoughts that I have right now, I have to choose a very small part and put it into words, because when we describe something in words, that's a very limited instrument to express something that is far vaster. And I'm talking about ideas. Imagine when we are talking about what the ultimate truth is, obviously we are not going to be able to put it into words. And yet, we do need, on the physical plane, to use words. So, for example, to try to approach this question of descriptions of truth from, or taking into account the idea that words are limited, what the Theosophical Society proposes is, this is our second object, to encourage the study of comparative religion, philosophy, and science. So the idea is that when we are willing to look at things from different perspectives, we begin to lose that narrowness that is natural when we know only one point of view. So the idea is that let us appreciate that especially those things that are ultimate can be expressed in many different ways, many of which seem paradoxical. And we see, for example, typically, although each religion has its own, again, differences within, but typically in Buddhism, they would describe the ultimate reality as emptiness, for example. In Hinduism, they would use sometimes even the opposite, purna, which is, the completeness, like in the Gnostics, the Christian Gnostics, the pleroma, the completeness, the fullness. So you have two religions, one saying that is empty, one saying that is full. And when you start examining the reasons why they say one or the other, if you have an open mind, you can see that they both have a point, because we are talking about something that is not material. So from a certain perspective, there is emptiness of everything that is known, that is limited, that is conditioned. All that is gone. It's not there. This is part of the beginnings of the mystical experience, and levels of mystical experience that we all have access to. The realization that there is a state where everything is gone, and yet there is a sense of fullness there. Not something that is full of something else. That emptiness is full, and you can feel it. So you can see how different traditions may choose to present their perceptions in different ways. Because since every way is conditioned, every description has its light and its darkness, its shadow. If I tell you that truth is empty, that is great to get rid of the ego, for example, but some people find it completely uninspiring. Now, if I tell you that truth is fullness, that may be inspiring for the ego, fullness, I'm going to get things, but then the ego will be there always trying to wait for something to get. So every explanation has its light and its shadow. And then the different traditions try to, many times even to correct what was going on at the time that the teacher was giving the teachings. So it is important, I think this second object of the society is very important, so that we develop a flexibility of consciousness so that we can really try to look at the truth in any presentation that is serious. And each of us can determine whether something is serious or not. But I would say even a wrong idea is just a right idea that is either misapplied or taken too far or misinterpreted. Let's say today the idea of conversion came up. Going out and convert other people to our beliefs, our views, our ways. Obviously, the Theosophical Society is completely, I wouldn't say against it. If that's your way, it's your ways, but that's not how we think is healthy to do it. However, if you look at conversion, the concept of conversion, you can see that there is a truth there. What is conversion per se? Well, it's your desire to help other people to achieve spiritual realization, whatever concept you have of what that is. And that's a great desire to have. Now, if we are not wise, we may do it in a way that is unhealthy, that is counterproductive, that is violent. But you can see how there is something true there. So instead of just fighting the ideas as being wrong, you can try to work with the other person to kind of purify the idea, refine it, to see what can be the weaknesses of that idea. And of course, you can do that only if you do the same with your own tradition. If you don't know how to do it with your own tradition, that is the one that you have some handle on, then you won't be able to do it with others. But the idea here is that it is always healthy to try to have this open mind, not a mind that is not discerning, but an open mind ready to examine and to separate what is true and what is false. And of course, what is true and false, from your perspective, we need to know that our perception is always limited. So that is one aspect, but also the other aspect, the comparative study, not only within religion and spirituality, but also philosophy and science. And what this is encouraging us to do is to have a view of the world that can be rational, for example, that can be empirical. We see, or I seem to see a lot in the spiritual environment, people who seem to lose grasp of the reality. So that's a danger of a spiritual attitude, because if we realize everything is possible, nothing is defined, etc., well, it's easy to take it too far. And then, as one of Blavatsky's teachers said, the exaggeration of good is evil, or the exaggeration of good is wrong. So when we take something too far, then we start missing the mark. So the idea is, can we have a view of the world that is empirical, even in spirituality? If we want to have a view that is empirical, that we need to practice. Of course, we need to learn theory. In any science that you study or any field, you first need to know the theory. And sometimes the theory seems to be, you don't understand why they are making you study that. But then when you start applying that, you realize, oh, this is important for this and for that. So if you have an empirical approach to life, then you want to try to verify these spiritual teachings to the degree that is possible for you right now. And as you progress in your growth, a broader field of spiritual teachings fall within your purview, let's say, and direct experience. Now, also we need the philosophy in the sense that we may become materialistic if we only rely on what is tangible, what is empirical. So we need a more metaphysical view of life also. Blavatsky would talk many times about the Platonic approach from the universals to the particulars, understanding universal laws and seeing how those laws rule the particular things in the world. And then the more Aristotelian point of view, that is the one that science uses, you start with what is perceivable, and then you try to draw or to perceive and understand the universal aspects that are behind the phenomena. So the philosophical approach to life is, be empirical, but at the same time, don't let your inquiry, your perception be reduced to what the five senses can bring. So work also with all these wonderful teachings, metaphysical and metaphysical in the sense of those teachings that talk about the root of the things that we see and perceive with our senses. But that also is not enough, because you may become just intellectual. With science and philosophy, you may become just intellectual. So the religion aspect is also necessary. So that our work, we do this so that there is a spiritual development, which the spiritual qualities are love and compassion, and we are not talking about psychic faculties, which they may be very helpful in a wise person and dangerous in a person that is not wise. But religion, in the sense of spirituality, is what gives the framework why we are trying to understand life, and from what point of view, or with what intention. It's not just to become a scholar. So this object is proposing to Theosophists to have this approach to life, to themselves, to the teachings, or to the different teachings. And that's very integrative in the sense that then one aspect balances out the other, and we don't go to any extremes. And this is what Blavatsky tried to do in The Secret Doctrine, for example. The subtitle of The Secret Doctrine, which is one of the main books of Blavatsky, is The Synthesis of Science, Religion, and Philosophy. So she tried to show a point of view that integrates these three avenues of knowledge, let's say. Now, she uses synthesis there. Sometimes people say that Theosophy is a syncretism. Syncretism means just bring different elements together and just create a kind of Frankenstein, that has some life. But a synthesis is something different. If you just put together atoms or molecules of oxygen and hydrogen, you don't have water. You just have gases there mixed. But if you can synthesize, that's the technical word, and you can bring together and melt these molecules, then you have something that is fundamentally different, which is water, fundamentally different from the gases. So the synthesis brings up something fundamentally different. And that's what in the theosophical literature is trying to do. It's not just to present a conglomeration of different facts. It's just to say, how do you look at life? How do you understand life, yourself, humanity, when you bring all these points of view together and you can integrate them? And the fact that the view that theosophical teachings present are neither of these is that scientists don't regard theosophy as a science, philosophers don't regard theosophy as a philosophy, and of course most religious people don't regard it as a religion. It's for science, there is too much woo-woo, spiritual stuff. For philosophers, there is too many claims of a direct perception, mystical perception, so that's not philosophy. Philosophy comes from the mind, at least in modern philosophy. Plato would say something very different. And religion, of course, Theosophy is too rational, too bent on explaining things, you need faith, and that's it. Of course, I'm characterizing in very general ways this. But anyway, so at the level of the doctrine, what the theosophical tradition proposes is to learn to look at the world with with intellectual honesty, with intellectual humility, with a mind that is willing to see the best in the different points of view without ignoring the wrong things. The concept of jihad that today, produces so much reaction in many people. Of course, we can recognize it's being used in the wrong way, but can we have the good heart to look at Islam in this case and see what the original intention of this teaching is? And can we recognize the value of this teaching while acknowledging that, of course, it's being misused, But then any tradition can be misused. We are seeing today how many wonderful Christian teachings are being misused. And we can say the same of any tradition. So the idea is, can we have this open mind, this warm heart to be able to appreciate all the different points of view, and to have this flexibility to be able to integrate the different views. If most religious people were like the speakers that we had today, there would be no religious problem. Because you see, they belong to their tradition, but at the same time, they can borrow from each other, not because their tradition doesn't have it, but because, oh, this is nicely expressed in this way. Why can't I borrow it and share and share? And they kept doing that with each other and with other traditions. So, this is, to me, evidently, this is the path to peace at the level of the different religions. Then we can include the philosophical views and the scientific view. So let's go then to the second point, the areas of development. By this I mean, what should we develop as human beings? We have in our Western secular tradition, especially among the educated class, the mind is the highest thing. So you have to be intellectual, smart, intelligent. The mind rules everything. Emotions are normally seen as something that is worthless. In spiritual traditions, many times, especially in the West, in the East, not so much in the West, but the physical body, for example, is dismissed. This is just illusion, just a veil. It's a veil on the soul, etc. But in the Theosophical approach, the idea is that as human beings, all these different levels are important and necessary in order to have a sane, healthy, and enlightened attitude regarding life and ourselves and others. So, for example, we have this quote from an early member who was a disciple of one of Blavatsky's teachers. He says, "The prescribed course of self-discipline is a course of moral, mental, and physical development carried on in parallel lines, one being useless without the other. The physical nature must be rendered more ethereal and sensitive, the mental more penetrating and profound, the moral more self-denying and philosophical." So the idea is, you see, there is no mention of the spiritual nature, because the spiritual nature is the divine within us. The spiritual nature per se is beyond evolution, beyond development, because it's perfect from the very beginning. But part of, at least how the Theosophical tradition looks at this, is that part of the idea is to learn to manifest, to make manifest the divine through all these different aspects of a human being, to bring heaven to earth in that sense. So we need to work on all the different aspects so that the divine can express without distortion. So I'll give you just quickly a few quotes illustrating this. For example, Annie Besant says, "The inner self cannot do effective work on the physical plane if the instrument, which is the body, is injured, spoiled, blunted, or stunted by any habit which injures physical life." The next one from Blavatsky, "The power to know does not come from book study, nor from mere philosophy, but mostly from the actual practice of altruism in deed, word, and thought. For that practice purifies the covers of the soul and permits that light to shine down into the brain mind." So again, the moral development is important because it purifies our nature so that the divine can express through us. And then one from Jeffrey Hodgson, another important theosophist, "Every erroneous concept and conclusion blunts mental perceptions, beclouds the clarity and reduces the capacity for intelligence and understanding. Clear thinking, utterly impersonal and strictly logical, this is essential to the development of implicit insight into first truths or wisdom. So here again, it's not that truth can be grasped by the mind, by mere mental activity, but if a perception of truth is going to come to us, we need a mind that is clear, that is not distorted, that is able to see things as they are, that is a good receptacle for whatever aspect of truth we can perceive. And again, always remember that because we are conditioned, we can only perceive conditioned aspects of truth. Truth per se is beyond all of us, and for this reason also normally in the Theosophical tradition, the different religions are seen as the manifestations of different aspects of truth that are not to be dismissed. Your own personality that has its own conditioning may resonate better with a certain presentation of truth, with a certain approach to truth, and that is fine. We can all have preferences because, again, we are conditioned. So something will be more susceptible to be helpful to us than something else. But that doesn't mean that we can just disregard the rest. So the idea is that all religions are bringing an aspect of truth, or several, with emphasis on different dimensions of truth, and that's why they are all important in humanity. Of course, religions as a spiritual endeavor. The word religion means to unite, to bring back together, religare from the Latin. Religions as institutions, we have seen in the talks earlier, they are a problem. This is what made one of Blavatsky's teachers to say 2/3 of the suffering in humanity is due to religion. 2/3 of the suffering in humanity is due to religion. For several reasons. This is a whole other concept, but the living in fear, the divisiveness that it produces, there are many ways in which religion, without even noticing it, may be affecting us and producing some condition that leads us into suffering. But religion as the spiritual endeavor is important. So what this is proposing to us is that if we are going to be healthy individuals, we have to attend to all the different areas of our individuality. We can't, in general, we can't be healthy spiritually if we are torturing the body. Of course, torturing the body, you can produce some psychic phenomena. And many religions or people in different religions have discovered that. If you put the body to great stress, you start developing psychic perceptions, etc. But the psychic is not the spiritual. And often an extreme asceticism leads to an unbalanced state of mind and emotions. We cannot also repress the emotions. Emotions are important, otherwise we wouldn't have emotions. So we need to learn how to work with the emotions in a way that helps the expression of the spiritual. And we need a clear mind. Many times there are great, nice people that just have wrong ideas or wrong views that lead them into cruel actions simply because they are not perceiving correctly. So we need to have a sound mind. We need to have a clear mind. Of course, we can put too much emphasis on any of these and just become slaves of the body, and then all our spirituality is about the body and feeding it well and doing right exercises. And that is good, but if that's all our spirituality, it's not enough. Same with the emotions. We may go to a spiritual organization because it makes us feel good. But then when we leave, we're in the same place that we were before. We don't understand better how to deal with life, with people, with us. Or we can have organizations that is just intellectual, philosophical ideas, which again, don't touch our real life. So the proposal is to work on all the aspects of ourselves. And then we start generating the spiritual health. And when we are healthy, physically, emotionally, mentally, we express the spiritual in our relationship with others. I think that, I saw this in South America, this polarization that we're experiencing right here now. In South America for a long time. And partly, and I'm not, I don't know about political science or anything, this is just my observation of human. But I see when some people don't have enough or have too much stress or are neglected, they fall into an unhealthy emotional and mental state. And that's very easily related. And perhaps in the 80s, of course I wasn't here, but perhaps if the distribution of wealth was better, there weren't so many people in need, and maybe, this polarization wasn't there so prominently. But as time passes and the distribution of wealth is so unfair, and you start generating a population that is under so much stress, then you can very easily twist that suffering, assign them causes that are good for you politically at the level of power, and produce chaos. So here again, if we are going to be happy, we have to take care of everybody. How do we take care of everybody? And this is part also with ourselves. If we want to be happy, we need to take care of all the different aspects of ourselves, not neglect any of them. And the last point, at the level of practice, because, let me read this quote and then I'll comment a little on this. This is from a book called Light on the Path that says, "Seek out the way, seek it not by any one road. To each temperament, there is one road which seems the most desirable. But the way is not found by devotion alone, by religious contemplation alone, by ardent progress, by self-sacrificing labor, by studious observation of life. None alone can take the disciple more than one step onwards. All steps are necessary to make up the ladder." So because of this idea that we need to develop all the different aspects of our being in a harmonious way and not overdevelop one and neglect the other, then the approach to the practice is quite holistic and integrative. We talk very often about study, meditation, and service. And of course, there are more things that are proposed in theosophical literature. These are like archetypes, to study to nourish this right understanding, meditation to transform that understanding into a lived experience, and service to express that wisdom and that love and that compassion. I have talked about this in our previous convention when we were together. So I'm not going to go, to look at this in detail. Also, the previous speakers have talked about this, starting with Doug at night about the service. But to finish the presentation, let me show you a way to interpret the three objects of the Theosophical Society. This is what the organization proposes to its members as things that we need to, or that are proposed to be developed. The language is, a language that was produced in the 19th century, so there is some gendered language there. There is always discussion whether we should change the language. The problem is that the society is international, And words that are a problem in one language are not a problem in another language. Like brotherhood is not a problem in Spanish that is like fraternity, fraternidad. And like that, when you start looking at this, it's really messy. So rather than go with the winds of the time, normally the idea was, let us keep it like that and explain the meaning, But anyway, so the first object that says to form a nucleus of the universal brotherhood of humanity without distinction of race, creed, sex, caste, or color. This has a more superficial meaning, that is, let us create an organization where people from all walks of life can come together and we can work together, etc. But in all theosophical literature, you see that there is a deeper meaning, because if we are really going to have to be a nucleus, and the idea of a nucleus is because we cannot go out and convert other people. So our aspiration is not to turn all humanity into a perfect reflection of the universal brotherhood. Let us start with those who want to try this, and then that will grow naturally. But for this, we need a mystical perception. What this object is asking the members of the society is begin to nourish a mystical attitude in you, the one that is trying to look at the unity, the universality behind all the differences. So if you are working with this object, you are trying to look past the differences to that which is in common to others. And that's a mystical perception. This is what all mystics perceive in different degrees of depth and clarity. So the first object is proposing the members incorporate that mystic element in your life. Then we have the second object that says, we talked about that, to encourage the study of comparative religion, philosophy, and science. This is not to produce a scholar, but to generate that sense of wisdom that we talked about. And this is like, if we use archetypes, this would be like the archetype of the sage, the wise person. So this object is proposing work on trying to develop this wisdom, this ability to bring the different points of view together, to see what is valuable in everything. So try to be a wise person in life. Try to be a person that can be a unitive force in your community. And then the third object that talks about to investigate unexplained laws of nature and the powers latent in man. In the US, we say in human beings. This is like the official definition or wording. But investigate the unexplained laws of nature and the powers latent in human beings. And this is what we could call the yogi, or in Theosophy we call it the occultist. The word occult today is used in different ways. I mean, Blavatsky was the first person to use this word occult in English. I think originally it came from French. And Blavatsky was the first one in bringing that word in English. And what she meant is more or less what we may think today of as a yogi, as this enlightened being that has actualized all the potentialities in him or her, and that is, that has love and compassion, power and will, and abilities to help humanity beyond what we have at our disposal. So the idea of the third object is begin to look within yourself. What are your potentialities that you may not be using? Can you educate, stimulate all these aspects that will allow you to help others in a more effective way? And we can start with the external aspects. We have many times either money or time or intelligence that we normally don't pay attention to. And some people realize, wait, I can do a lot of good with some of this. Then you can develop a sense of wisdom, understanding to help those who are in distress, or compassion and love to support those who are in distress. And then, of course, there are deeper and deeper potentialities in all human beings that we can use for the service of humanity. So this third object is saying, bring that aspect also into your life. Start working with this. And this is also very integrative. The idea why I'm bringing this is that when we look at the practices, normally you won't find in theosophical literature just chant this mantra or this prayer or use this posture or something, that is very simple to explain, which may be very effective, but in the theosophical view, that's one part. We need more, and we need a diversity of practices. We will naturally be inclined to some more than others, but the advice is don't grow in a too lopsided way. Try to keep an eye on all the different aspects. All right, so that's more or less what I wanted to present. I believe that with this foundation, this is a way to stimulate in humanity something that can bring us together, that can make us healthy, can make us comfortable with being, and that can bring us together. And hopefully, as generations and after generations go by, this becomes more and more common in humanity. Thank you.
Thanks, Pablo, for a good talk. In regards to the third object that we were just looking at, can you just speak a little bit about the unexplained laws of nature and the difference between the psychic powers and what a spiritual power would be, and historically what the TS meant by the third object, and perhaps a little bit about what you find important about it as opposed to what someone else might.
So you want me to give 3 lectures? Well, I can say something briefly. There is a lecture that I did on the latent powers in human beings that came just a few weeks ago live on the YouTube channel. And the unexplained laws of nature and all this is, the part of the idea is, let us learn to interpret life from the occult perspective. What do I mean by that? From the hidden perspective. So when the speakers were talking about that, when we see a human being, do we see just what comes through our senses, or are we trying to look at the divine spark that is expressing through that body? When something happens in our lives, do we think of that something challenging, for example? Do we think of that as something that is unfair or that I just want to escape from? Or can I understand that, at least in the theosophical view, there is an order to the things that happen which has an educational purpose, and therefore, as difficult as something may be, it has there is a purpose there for spiritual growth if we can take it in the right way. And if we can't, if we are lucky enough to have people around that can help us take it in the right way. So can we look at life from that perspective and not just from the perspective of what I like or I don't like, etc. Also, we are going through a period of unrest. Well, in the theosophical tradition, there is the idea that we grow through cycles. And there are cycles where there is expansion and cooperation and happiness. And then there are cycles where there is strife and division. And then from all that suffering, we learn. And then we enter a new cycle of growth. And that's how we grow. So can we interpret reality in that way so that we are not so anxious and so afraid? So these are a few examples. One of the purposes of theosophical literature that has so much explanation of the cosmos and all that is to provide us a way to be able to relate to life in a different way. So that's all part of the third object. And then the part of the latent powers, you can watch the other video just because we don't have time. Thank you.
Anyone else?
I wanted to ask if the three objects are the goals of societies and systems, or are there individuals that you can identify that might be good exemplars of all, having lived and expressed these three objects?
Yeah. Yeah, we try not to do that. I mean, how do you think, you know, part of the Theosophical tradition is we try not to invest personalities with a particular official role. You know, I'm talking here, I'm being a speaker for the time being, but I'm no guru or priest or anything. I'm just a student. And, you know, that's part of trying to remove those roles is part of what the Theosophical tradition tries to do. Again, as everything, it has its light and its shadow, you know, and it's great from certain points of view. It brings some weaknesses to the society from other points of view. But then any decision you make have those two possibilities. So organizations, religions, they choose what aspects to emphasize. So we actively try not to say this individual is a true Theosophist or this kind. No, we are all students and we all aspire to be Theosophists, but that is left unsaid.
Pablo, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, do we have reason to be hopeful? Have there been periods in our history where we've gotten, say, nudges or boosts and help for particular reasons that put us in a more progressive place spiritually and scientifically or whatever, and help us maybe not see things like the world seems or the country seems quite broken now? Is there, from your understanding in history and now, reason to be optimistic?
Yeah, I'm not, you know, I don't like the idea of being optimistic because I think we need to develop the ability to see things as they are, and neither to try to interpret them better than they are, nor worse than they are. So, but hopeful, I'm unconditionally hopeful. I personally, and I may be wrong, but personally, I have no doubt that everything works out to continue to grow. Because yes, there are many things happening in the country that a large part of its population is not happy about. But are these things new? How were we living 100 years ago, 50 years ago? It's just that now all these things are coming to the surface, and also there is a part of the population that consciously recognizes this is not right. Many of these things were happening all along, but people didn't find out, they didn't realize this is so bad. So a lot of the trouble that we have today, in my humble view, again, I'm not, you know, a political scientist or anything like that, but I am interested in this. I keep up with the news and all that, and I try to understand human nature. And to me, the trouble is a great sign. It's a sign of at least one part of the population saying this is not acceptable any longer. And naturally, it will produce a reaction. And I'm sad for all the suffering that this is producing. But, you know, in Annie Besant used to say, you have two ways to grow, either through wisdom or through suffering. Because if we are not wise, suffering teaches us what we shouldn't do, where we end up if we take this path, and then that's when we decide to go in a different direction. Many people around the world took democracy for granted and were, you know, not really involved, were complacent, and then when you feel that you are about to lose something, you start valuing it. And that's how we grow. If you look at human nature, you know, I've been listening and reading a lot about history, and unfortunately, the great breakthroughs came always after some crisis, wars or pandemics or things like that. Because again, we as collectively, we cannot yet learn by wisdom, so suffering is a friend. Not a friend that we have to stimulate or anything. We have to try to help reduce the suffering to the degree that that's possible. But from the theosophical perspective, all this inevitably leads us to truth. Because error is not true, is transient. Only truth is eternal. So whatever that is not aligned with truth, sooner or later will fall. Now, if we are wiser, we can go through this with less suffering. If we are not wise, we will have to go with more suffering, but I have no doubt that all this will help us grow as humanity.
Okay, Stephen, do we have any questions online?
Thank you, Steve. Yes, we have a couple questions from our online attendees. Pablo, first question is about the second object. The study of comparative religion, philosophy, and science is quite voluminous. What encouragement or recommendation would you have for a mature novice who is just starting to put all of this together?
Mm-hmm. Yes, we don't expect that all people will have the time and the inclination to study all religions, philosophies, and sciences. That's why when I was interpreting this, I was saying that the main aim of that object is to encourage in us the attitude of a scientist, of a philosopher, and of a religious person. Then in your individual path, you will find that there are certain subjects that you may be interested in, and it's very helpful to start learning different perspectives. To help you with that, the Theosophical Society organizes this kind of programs where you have the opportunity to see from practitioners in different traditions how they see something, for example. So that's why we have programs on the different traditions to help the public in general to learn, at least to some extent, how much you can learn from, whatever much you can learn from a lecture or a course, but to start getting connected to different ways of looking at something. And then there are some students that really like that and they go deeper and they know several traditions, and others that don't, but that is not necessary. As long as you can develop that more embracing point of view, more open attitude, more flexible understanding, I think that's good enough.
The next one is about artificial intelligence, and specifically in AI development, there's something called emerged behavior, which is some activity that's not pre-programmed or predicted by AI units. Do you think this presents a danger for human evolution? What should humanity's role be in this matter? Should we observe, or should we be trying to counteract this trend for the sake of humanity?
Oh, I forgot the crystal ball in my room, but this is a question that I wonder a lot. So by this, I mean, I can give you my impression. Of course, I don't know. But something that is interesting, that's why I like history, because this is not the first time that we go through any of this. So I was listening to a podcast, and they were talking about the relationship of humanity with technology. And when the tractor was invented, let's say, and produced, that produced a real shock in many people who were farmers. There was a large proportion of farmers who were using horses, and they were really saying that the end of the world was near. And there was a lot of financial and economical unrest and difficulties. And this happened almost with any piece of technology that was disruptive to some extent. So my personal impression is that artificial intelligence is not as intelligent as we think it is, I think. And there are people who know about this that have that opinion. I'm not in the field. But I think that, of course, there are dangers that people are going to be replaced by this technology, as was the case with all technology. There is a danger that this technology is going to be used by bad actors, as was the case with all technology, with social media, with internet, with computers, etc., all those dangers are real. Now, the idea that AI may be a threat to humanity, kind of Terminator, kind of, I don't know. I don't think that right now we should worry about that. Now, that doesn't mean we should not be working hard on putting a moral compass in AI, etc. But personally, I think the reaction is mostly fear to technologies that are disruptive. And I know that there are several, people, heads of companies that are, publishing these warnings. I doubt their intentions. There are many intentions that may not be the one that seem to be there, that may be motivating this. For once, for example, the companies that have already developed AI and are asking for regulations, that's a typical way to keep all the competition down, the ones that are trying to develop new. You already have it, you put regulations, you stop the competition. So that may be part of the motivation. So things are very complex. And I don't know the right answer. But personally, if you ask me personally, I'm not worried about AI in that way. I think it can be a wonderful tool. It has helped my work wonderfully. I use all the artificial technology intelligence that is out there, and it has been wonderful for my work. But I recognize that it can be used for evil too. But yeah, no, so far what we see, I don't think there is those kind of dangers. But we should be proactively working on putting guardrails on the technology.
Very good. Thank you, Pablo. Next, we have a similar question about cloning. Do you think cloning is the right direction for humanity to take? And what should our role be in either just observing it, supporting it, or allowing it to develop in its own way? And did the masters ever express any attitude towards cloning?
Yeah, I suppose you mean cloning of mammals, for example, or animals. I mean, cloning, I'm a microbiologist and worked in molecular biology, and we constantly clone bacteria and things like that. But when we come to more complex organisms, that may be a little more complex or as a problem. I would not try to manipulate, higher organisms, higher in the sense of biology, organisms in cloning organisms. But again, there is one of the letters from what Blavatsky called Mahatmas, that are this group of enlightened beings that trained her. One of them says that toward the end of human evolution, within the cycles that are proposed in the Theosophical tradition, scientists will have learned to inject life in dead organisms, just like the Frankenstein kind of thing. So we never know what is part of the natural development in the knowledge of humanity. Again, I wouldn't go in the direction of cloning human beings, because we don't know what happens with the soul. The soul, would a soul incarnate? And when we talk about cloning, we are not talking about creating a fresh human being, fully grown. When you clone an embryo. So it's not as drastic as some people imagine, but you are replicating an embryo that was not produced by an egg and a sperm, for example. So that embryo that begins to develop, would a soul anchor itself, with that embryo, so that the clone would be a full human being or not? That we don't know. But so I wouldn't go that direction, but it may not be all that bad. These things are super complex. I want to keep, a rational approach, in the sense that we don't know what we don't know.